So, welcome back, everybody. Our next guest speaker is Lina, our Deloitte tax specialist, who will discuss VAT peculiarities for fintech companies. So, welcome, Lina.
Thank you, Mindaugas, for the introduction. And as Mindaugas mentioned, I am from Deloitte tax team and responsible for indirect taxation. Today, I'm going to speak about value-added tax for fintech companies, or shortly VAT. Why VAT? Because VAT is transactions-based tax, and you may face or ask questions about VAT in every single step. Either you render or offer new product, or you acquire some services or goods from your business partners. Many fintech companies offers technology solutions for payments or payment services. Therefore, fintech company faces VAT question, whether the services offered will be taxed with VAT or without VAT. But when it comes the time to decide whether such services will be with or without VAT, it may be a headache. But as I would like to leave tips for evaluation of the services for the end of my presentation. And I will start my presentation with the obligation VAT registration. VAT registration is not automatic in Lithuania. Therefore, if a fintech company needs to decide whether it has to be registered for VAT purposes, first of all, there is three options. There is obligation, there is a voluntary registration, and there is no obligation for VAT registration. If a fintech company is involved only in VAT exempt supplies, there is no obligation for VAT registration, and such company can continue doing business without having VAT number. But if there is a case that a company offers services which will be subject to VAT, then there is some key points to be decided. First of all, the turnover. How much income the company earns from the VAT taxable activity. And there is obligatory VAT registration, then the VAT taxable supplies exceeds 45,000 euros per year. But this is not the only key point to be decided, because it is also necessary to evaluate who is your client. VAT registration is obligatory in Lithuania, and it will be assessed as obligation only when your customers are established in Lithuania. Therefore, if your customers are established in another countries or are residents of another countries, it could be the case that even a fintech company is established in Lithuania, but it may have obligation for VAT registration in another countries. Therefore, key decisions when deciding whether the company should be registered for VAT here in our country. So this is what kind of activity and whether the company does VAT taxable supplies. Who is your customers? Because if your customers are from abroad, there may be the case that it will not be enough to be registered for VAT purposes in Lithuania. And there may be cases that obligation will be in another countries. Another point about VAT registration, I would say VAT registration is administrative requirement, and VAT registration itself does not create rights and obligations for VAT purposes, because this is the transactions which creates rights and obligations. And the next slide, I will introduce the right of companies involved in VAT taxable supplies. And this is the right to recover VAT. Based on my experience, I was facing the cases and I was asked, well, I paid VAT, do I have a right to recover it? And in general answer is that VAT recovery is also related to VAT taxable supplies. Therefore, for fintech companies, I would see 3 points. It could be full right to recover VAT. It could be the case that you have no right to recover VAT, or it could be a middle case, when you can recover some of VAT paid. And it also relates what kind of activity you do in Lithuania. Either this activity, the services which you offer is taxed with VAT or not. If all your services rendered, the products offers are taxed with VAT, then you will have full right to input VAT deduction. If a company runs business and all the services offered will be considered as payment services exempt from VAT, there will be no right to recover input VAT amounts paid to your business partners. Or, as I mentioned, it could interim case, because most usual cases is that the fintech companies has both products. There is products which are with VAT, and the products are which are without VAT. Therefore, in such cases, company will have at least partial right to input VAT deduction. In general, this slide covers cases with the local business partners, but the market is quite global, and it could be the cases then the company has business partners from abroad, and those business partners render services. And comparing with the local services, such services has no VAT, at least from the first sight. But the VAT law has anti-avoidance rule, which states that when the company established in Lithuania acquires services from abroad, it has an obligation to calculate VAT for the services acquired. Here is a slight difference, because then the local business partners render service, so the supplier is obliged to calculate VAT. But then the company acquires services from abroad, so this is the purchaser who is obliged to calculate VAT in Lithuania. And the key points to remember about such acquisition of services, because this rule is applicable either your partner is established in a EU country or non-EU country. The company, fintech company established in Lithuania, may be required to calculate VAT. Either the company is registered for VAT purposes or not, meaning that, well, there is no such requirement. And the most usual cases, it is IT services, marketing services, or advertising services. And when deciding whether the company needs to calculate VAT for the services acquired, it is also crucial to evaluate whether the services which the company acquires will be considered as VAT taxable or VAT exempt services. Therefore, if a fintech company acquires financial money payment processing services, there will be no obligation to calculate VAT for this acquisition of services. In all my previous slides, I pointed out one key question. Whether the services which the fintech company renders or acquires will be considered as VAT exempt or VAT taxable services. And the last slide of the presentation is the key point, how to evaluate. VAT law, VAT directive, and case law provides the list of the services which could be VAT exempt or VAT taxable. But the list is not end, because the market is global and the new products are coming. And what is essential and important to remember when evaluating whether the service will be considered as payment service exempt from VAT, so this service rendered or acquired, it should be essential for money transfers. And such service shall effect changes in legal and financial conditions of the services rendered to final customers. But when it comes to fintech companies and the issue with fintech companies, because the fintech companies offers payment solutions. Sometimes this is software and this is platform, or it is also payment services. And there is also the Lithuanian tax authorities issued official commentary which states that if the company offers only software IT services, such services shall not be considered as payment services and cannot be exempt. Therefore, for the fintech companies, it is crucial to evaluate whether they offer payment service versus technical service, and which does not relate and do affect the payment process. Another example could be with intermediary services, because case law stated that in certain cases that intermediary services are crucial for providing payment services, such services could be exempt from VAT. And it could be the case with a fintech, because the fintech offers solutions for communications to the clients with the banks, with the insurance companies. Therefore, it may be the case that the fintech offers intermediary payment service, which will be exempt from VAT. I would like to finalize my presentation and to leave you with the homeworks, because my advice would be not to leave VAT for the last minute. If possible, evaluate the consequences, evaluate the services which you render, or the services which you acquire at the beginning. Because initially, it maybe looks not important, but later on, it could be quite a big issue if a tax authority starts investigations, recalculates VAT, and applies penalties and late payment interest. As I mentioned, sometimes when deciding what kind of services and what VAT rate shall be applied is quite a bit difficult. Therefore, you are not alone. You can apply for ruling to the Lithuanian tax authority, then evaluating services which you acquire or render. And of course, if necessary, you can contact us and we will be happy to help you answer your questions or when necessary to communicate with the tax authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina, for the presentation. I don't see any questions coming from the participants. Wrapping up your presentation, what would be 2-3 areas usually overlooked by fintech companies? Is it more on output or input VAT side? Which would that be?
I could say both, because then evaluating services, and based on my experience when dealing with the fintech companies, sometimes there is a feeling that that if a fintech company is involved in payment processes, so there is no VAT. As I mentioned, well, this is not in all cases. Therefore, each case shall be evaluated and examined quite in detail. And also for the acquisition of services. One point is with the acquisition of services from abroad, because I had cases when the company considered that it has no right to calculate VAT because it is not a VAT payer, or it has no obligation to calculate VAT because it acquires services from United States. So this is wrong. And if calculating in a wrong way, so it can cause penalties and consequences later on. And of course, with the input VAT deduction, sometimes there is cases when the approach is quite conservative. And especially when the company renders both VAT taxable and VAT exempt services, So there is area to consider and to recalculate which amounts of input VAT deduction can recover the company when doing both mixed, so-called mixed activity. So I think this is the main areas which we are facing and we are dealing with. And of course, communicating with the tax authority. As I mentioned, there is a possibility to write a binding rulings. So if possible, and if the company starts business, so it is advisable to contact tax authorities and to request additional questions.
Okay, Lina, thank you. I see a question from the participant. If tax authorities refuse to register payment company as a VAT taxpayer, what you would suggest?
First of all, I would suggest to identify what was the reason for not registering, because yes, I have been facing the cases when the tax authority rejected VAT registration. First of all, then you apply for VAT registration, so this is not automatic process, and the company is obliged to prove that it is going to do some VAT taxable activity. Therefore, if during VAT registration you did not manage to prove this activity, so evaluate again what kind of services the company renders. The other option, and sometimes the company did not provide enough information, because based on my experience when dealing with VAT registration, close communication with a tax inspector is required. And if a specific case, so we can talk and I could guide you how to get this VAT number.
Lina, thank you very much for the
Thank
insightful
you.
presentation.